the fact that this beautiful planet is in truth a battleground. Awareness of this may save New Texas from being the scene of a larger and more destructive battle. New Texas also knows who are its enemies, and who can be counted upon to stand as its friends.
Yes, Mr. Selk. Mr. Vuvuvu, I haven't heard any comment from you. No comment? Well, we'll have to close the court to consider this phase of the question.
The black screen slid up, for the second time during the trial. There was silence for a moment, and then the room became a bubbling pot of sound. At least 6 fights broke out among the spectators within 3 minutes. The rangers and court bailiffs were busy restoring order. Gale Hickok, who had been sitting on the front row of the spectator seats, came running up while I was still receiving the congratulations of my fellow diplomats.
"Stephen, how could you?" she demanded. "You know what you've done. You've gotten those murdering snakes turned loose."
Andrew Jackson Hickok left the prosecution table and approached.
"Mr. Silk, you've just secured the freedom of 3 men who murdered one of my best friends."
"Colonel Hickok, I believe I knew Silas Cumshaw before you did. He was one of my instructors at Dumbarton Oaks, and I have always had the deepest respect and admiration for him. But he taught me one thing, which you seem to have forgotten since you expatriated yourself, that in the diplomatic service, personal feelings don't count. The only thing of importance is the advancement of the policies of the Solar League."
"Silas and I were attachés together at the old embassy at Dramoul on Altair II," Colonel Hickok said.
What else he might have said was lost in the sudden exclamation as the black screen slid down. In front of Judge Nelson I saw there were 3 pistol belts and 3 pairs of automatics.
"Switchblade Joe Bunny, Jack High Abe Bunny, Turkey Buzzer Tom Bunny, together with your counsel, approach the court and hear the verdict," Judge Nelson said. The 3 defendants and their lawyer rose. The Bonnies were swaggering and laughing. But for a lawyer whose clients had just emerged from the shadow of the gallows, Sidney was looking remarkably unhappy. He probably had imagination enough to see what would be waiting for him outside. "It pains me inexpressibly," Judge Nelson said, "to inform you that this court cannot convict you of the cowardly murder of the learned and honorable old man Silas Cumshaw, nor can you be brought to trial in any other court on New Texas again for that dastardly crime. Here are your weapons, which must be returned to you. Sort them out yourselves, because I won't dirty my fingers on them. And you may regret and feel shame for your despicable act as long as you live, which, I hope, won't be more than a few hours."
With that, he used the end of his gavel to push the 3 belts off the bench and onto the floor at the Bonnies' feet. They stood laughing at him for a few moments, then stopped, picked the belts up, drew the pistols to check magazines and chambers, and then began slapping each other's backs and shouting jubilant congratulations at one another. Sidney's 2 assistants and some of his friends came up and began pumping Sidney's hands.
"There," Gale flung at me. "Now look at your masterpiece. Why don't you go up and congratulate him too?"
And with that she slapped me across the face. It hurt like the devil. She was a lot stronger than I'd expected. In about 2 minutes, I told her, "You can apologize to me for that, or weep over my corpse. Right now, though, you'd better be getting behind something solid."
Chapter 11.
I turned and stepped forward to confront the Bonnies, mentally thanking Gale. Up until she'd slapped me, I'd been weak-kneed and dry-mouthed with what I had to do. Now I was just plain angry, and I found that I was thinking a lot more clearly. Jack Bonnie's wounded left shoulder, I knew, wouldn't keep him from using his gun hand, but his shoulder muscles would be stiff enough to slow his draw. I'd intended saving him until I dealt with his brothers. Now I remembered how he'd gotten that wound in the first place. He'd been the one who'd used the auto rifle out at the Hickok ranch. so I changed my plans and moved him up to top priority. "Hold it!" I yelled at them. "You've been cleared of killing a politician, but you still have killing a Solar League ambassador to answer for. Now, get your hands full of guns if you don't want to die with them empty." The crowd of sympathizers and felicitators simply exploded away from the Bonney brothers. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sidney and a fat, blousy woman with brass-colored hair as they both tried to dive under the Friends of the Court table at the same place. The Bonney brothers simply stood and stared at me, for an instant, unbelievingly, as I got my thumbs on the release studs of my belt. Judge Nelson's gavel was hammering, and he was shouting, "Court of Political Justice, Confederate Continent of New Texas, is herewith adjourned. Reconvene 0900 tomorrow. Hit the floor!" "Damn, he means it!" Switchblade Joe Bonney exclaimed. Then they all reached for their guns. They were still reaching when I pressed the studs, and the Krupp Tatas popped into my hands, and I swung up my right-hand gun and shot Jack High through the head. After that, I just let my subconscious take over. I saw gun flames jump out at me from the Bonnie's weapons, and I felt my own pistols leap and writhe in my hands, but I don't believe I was aware of hearing the shots, not even from my own weapons. The whole thing probably lasted 5 seconds, but it seemed like 20 minutes to me. Then there was nobody shooting at me, and nobody for me to shoot at. The big room was silent, and I was aware that Judge Nelson and his 8 associates were rising cautiously from behind the bench. I holstered my left-hand gun, removed and replaced the magazine of the right-hand gun, then holstered it and reloaded the other one. Hottie Ringo and Francisco Peros and Commander Stonehenge were on their feet, their pistols drawn, covering the spectators' seats. Colonel Hickok had also drawn a pistol, and he was covering Sidney with it, occasionally moving the muzzle to the left to include the Zasroff ambassador and his 2 attachés. By this time, Nelson and the other 8 judges were in their seats, trying to look calm and judicial. "Your Honor," I said, "I fully realize that no judge likes to have his court turned into a shooting gallery. I can assure you, however, that my action here was not the result of any lack of respect for this court. It was pure necessity. Your Honor can see that. My government could not permit this crime against its ambassador to pass unpunished." Judge Nelson nodded solemnly. "Court was adjourned when this little incident happened, Mr. Silk," he said. He leaned forward and looked to where the 3 Bonney brothers were making a mess of blood on the floor. "I trust that nobody will construe my unofficial and personal comments here as establishing any legal precedent, and I wouldn't like to see this sort of thing becoming customary, but you did that all by yourself with those little bean-shooters? Not bad at all, Mr. Silk." I thanked him, then turned to the Zasroff ambassador. I didn't bother putting my remarks into BASIC. He understood, as well as I did, what I was saying. "Look, Fido," I told him, "my government is quite well aware of the source from which the orders for the murder of my predecessor came. These men I just killed were only the tools. We're going to get the brains behind them, if we have to send every warship we own into the Zasroff star cluster and devastate every planet in it. We don't let dogs snap at us. And when they do, we don't kick them, we shoot them." That, of course, was not exactly striped pants diplomatic language. I wondered, for a moment, what Norman Gazarian, the protocol man, would think if he heard an ambassador calling another ambassador Fido. But it seemed to be the kind of language that Mr. Vuvuvu understood. He skinned back his upper lip at me and began snarling and growling. Then he turned on his hind paws and padded angrily down the aisle away from the front of the courtroom. The spectators around him and above him began barking, baying, yelping at him. "Tie a can to his tail! Get for home, Bruno!" Then somebody yelled, "Hey, look! Even his wristwatch is blushing!" That was perfectly true. Mr. Gulafur Dispatin Vuvuvu's watch face, normally white,